the Army Reserve and the Territorial and Army Volunteer Reserve from 1920 to 2014, is the active duty volunteer reserve force, an integrated element of the British Army. The Army Reserve was created as the Territorial Force in 1908 by the Secretary of State for War, Richard Haldane, when the Territorial and Reserve Forces Act 1907 combined the previously civilian-administered volunteer force with the mounted yeomanry. Most volunteer infantry units had unique identities but lost these in the reorganisation, becoming territorial battalions of regular army infantry regiments. Some, notably the London, Monmouthshire and Hertfordshire regiments, maintained a separate identity. Its original purpose was home defence, although the establishment of the Territorial and Army Volunteer Reserve in 1967 involved a restructuring and revised doctrine leading to the provision of routine support for the regular army overseas. Reservists in the past also served as constables or bailiffs, even holding positions of civic duty as overseer of the parish. The more modern yeomen of the 18th century were cavalry-based units which were often used to suppress riots. Several units that are now part of the Army Reserve bear the title militia, reflecting their origins as part of that organisation prior to the formation of the Special Reserve in 1907. During periods of total war, the Army Reserve is incorporated by the royal prerogative into regular service under one code of military law for the duration of hostilities or until their activation is decided upon. After the Second World War, for example, the Army Reserve, or Territorial Army as it was known then, was not demobilized until 1947. Army reservists normally have a full-time civilian job or career, which in some cases provides skills and expertise that are directly transferable to a specialist military role, such as NHS employees serving in reservist Army Medical Services units. All Army Reserve personnel have the civilian jobs protected to a limited extent by law should they be compulsorily mobilized. There is, however, no legal protection against discrimination in employment for membership of the Army Reserve in the normal course of events. History. Formation to First World War. The Territorial Force was originally formed by the Secretary of State for War, Richard Haldane, following the enactment of the Territorial and Reserve Forces Act 1907, which combined and reorganized the old volunteer force with the yeomanry. As part of the same process, remaining units of militia were converted to the Special Reserve. The TF was formed on the 1st of April 1908 and contained 14 infantry divisions and 14 mounted yeomanry brigades. It had an overall strength of approximately 269,000. The individual units that made up each division or brigade were administered by county associations, with the county's Lord Lieutenant as president. The other members of the association consisted of military members, representative members and co-opted members. Associations took over any property vested in the volunteers or yeomanry under their administration. Each regiment or battalion had a regular army officer attached as full-time adjutant. The use of the word territorial signified that the volunteers who served with the force were under no obligation to serve overseas. In 1910, when asked to nominate for imperial service overseas in the event of mobilization, less than 10% of the force chose to do so. In August 1914, after the outbreak of the First World War, territorial units were given the option of serving in France, and, by the 25th of August, in excess of 70 battalions had volunteered. This question over the availability of territorial divisions for overseas service was one of Lord Kitchener's motivations for raising the new army. Separately, territorial formations initially saw service in Egypt and British India and other empire garrisons such as Gibraltar, thereby releasing regular units for service in France and enabling the formation of an additional 5 regular army divisions by early 1915. Several reserve units were also deployed with regular formations, and the first territorial unit to see action on the Western Front was the Glasgow Territorial Signallers Group, Royal Engineers, at the First Battle of Ypres on the 11th of October 1914. The first fully territorial division to join the fighting on the Western Front was the 46th Division in March 1915, with divisions later serving in Gallipoli and elsewhere. As the war progressed, and casualties mounted, the distinctive character of territorial units was diluted by the inclusion of conscript new army drafts. Following the armistice, all units of the Territorial Force were gradually disbanded. Interwar re-establishment and the Second World War. New recruiting started in early 1920, and a Territorial Force was reconstituted on the 7th of February 1920. On the 1st of October 1920, the Territorial Force was renamed the Territorial Army. The first-line divisions were reconstituted in that year. However, the composition of the divisions was altered, with a reduction in the number of infantry battalions required. There was also a reduced need for cavalry, and of the 55 yeomanry regiments, only the 14 most senior retained the forces. The remaining yeomanry were converted to artillery or armoured car units or disbanded. The amalgamation of 40 pairs of infantry battalions was announced in October 1921. As part of the post-war Yaddah financial cuts, the TAR was further reduced in size in 1922. Artillery batteries lost 2 of the 6 guns. The established size of infantry battalions was cut, and ancillary medical, veterinary, signals and Royal Army Service Corps units were either reduced in size or abolished. The bounty was also reduced to £3 for trained men and £2.10 S0D for recruits, which resulted in finding £1,175,000 of the total savings required from the Army as a whole. An innovation in 1922 was the creation of 2 air defence brigades to provide anti-aircraft defence for London. On the 29th of March 1939, it was announced that the size of the TAR was to be doubled by the reforming of the second-line units. The total strength of the TAR was to be 440,000. The field force of the Territorial Army was to rise from 130,000 to 340,000, organised in 26 divisions, while an additional 100,000 all ranks would form the anti-aircraft section. When the second line was reformed, they were a little different from the First World War predecessors. They had slightly different names, and the regiments assigned were different. After VJ Day in August 1945, the Territorial Army was significantly reduced, with all second-line and several first-line divisions once again disbanded. List of Territorial Army divisions. Second World War. The Territorial Army armoured and infantry divisions during the Second World War were: First Line, 1st Cavalry Division, 42nd Infantry Division, 43rd Infantry Division, 44th Infantry Division, 48th Infantry Division, 49th Infantry Division, 50th Infantry Division, 51st Infantry Division, 52nd Infantry Division, 53rd Infantry Division, 54th Infantry Division, 55th Infantry Division, 56th Infantry Division. Second Line, 9th Infantry Division, 12th Infantry Division, 15th Infantry Division, 18th Infantry Division, 23rd Infantry Division, 38th Infantry Division, 45th Infantry Division, 46th Infantry Division, 47th Infantry Division, 59th Infantry Division, 61st Infantry Division, 66th Infantry Division. Post-war reforms and Cold War. In 1947, the TAR was restructured and expanded through the reactivation of some of the first-line divisions that were initially disbanded after the war, keeping its former role of supplying complete divisions to the regular army until 1967. For the first time, TAR units were formed in Northern Ireland. The manoeuvre divisions established or re-established in 1947 were 42nd Infantry Division, 43rd Infantry Division, 44th Infantry Division, 49th Armoured Division District in 1961, 50th Infantry Division, 51st, 52nd Infantry Division, 53rd Infantry Division, 56th Armoured Division, the 16th Airborne Division, a totally TAR formation, was also raised at this time, under the command of Major General Robert E. Roy Urquhart. 52nd Division was re-established as a 10th Mixed Division in March 1950. The Territorials also provided much of the anti-aircraft cover for the United Kingdom until 1956. In that year, Anti-Aircraft Command and 15 anti-aircraft regiments of the Royal Artillery were disbanded, with 9 others passing into suspended animation as New English Electric Thunderbird surface-to-air missile units replaced them. On the 20th of December 1955, the Secretary of State for War informed the House of Commons that the armoured divisions and the mixed division were to be converted to infantry, and the 16th Airborne Division reduced to a parachute brigade group. Only 2 divisions, 2 armoured brigades, and a parachute brigade were to remain allocated for NATO and the defence of Western Europe. The other 8 divisions were placed on a lower establishment for home defence only. The territorial units of the Royal Armoured Corps were also reduced in number to 9 armoured regiments and 11 reconnaissance regiments. This was effected by amalgamation of pairs of regiments, and the conversion of 4 RAC units to an infantry role. The new Parachute Brigade Group became the 44th Independent Parachute Brigade Group. British forces contracted dramatically as the end of conscription in 1960 came in sight, as announced in the 1957 Defence White Paper. On the 20th of July 1960, a reorganisation of the TAR was announced in the House of Commons. The Territorials were to be reduced from 266 fighting units to 195. There was to be a reduction of 46 regiments of the Royal Artillery, 18 battalions of infantry, 12 regiments of the Royal Engineers and 2 regiments of the Royal Corps of Signals. The reductions were carried out in 1961, mainly by amalgamation of units. Thus, on the 1st of May 1961, the TAR divisional headquarters were merged with regular army districts, which were matched with civil defense regions to aid mobilization for war. The number of infantry brigades were reduced from 31 to 23, and the 2 armored brigades were disbanded. This was followed by a complete reorganization announced in the 1966 Defense White Paper from the 1st of April 1967, when the title Territorial and Army Volunteer Reserve was adopted, that abolished the former regimental and divisional structure of the TAR. Units in the new TAVR were divided into 4 categories. TAVR units available for all purposes. TAVR2 units with a NATO role, specifically support for the British Army of the Rhine. TAVR3 home defence units. TAVR-IV, consisting of bands and the university-based officer training corps. TAVR-II units were known as volunteers, and those in TAVR-III as territorials. These terms were often incorporated into the unit titles. The TAVR-III was disbanded in 1969, with the units being reduced to 8-man cadres. The cadres became part of air sponsoring. TAVR2 unit, although continuing to wear the badges and perpetuating the traditions of the forebears. An increase in the size of the TAVR in 1971 led to the formation of a number of battalions based on these cadres. In 1979, the Territorial Army title was restored and, in the following years, its size was somewhat increased, with the regimental system being progressively reinstated. Although, due to its decreased established size, brigades rather than divisions were used at a maneuver formation level, the TAR was thus re-rolled into its modern form. Instead of supplying complete combat divisions, its function was to round out regular formations by supplying units of up to battalion size, and to supply extra support functions such as engineers, medical units and military police. 1998 onwards. After the Strategic Defence Review of 1998, the TAR's size of around 56,200 was further reduced. The infantry suffered most, with 87 companies in 33 battalions reducing to 67 companies in 15 battalions. As of 2006, the Territorial Army has an authorised strength of 42,000, though recruiting difficulties put the actual strength of the TAR significantly below that figure. Army reservists have seen service in a number of conflicts that the UK has been involved with since 1945. However, they served in particularly large numbers in two conflicts. The Korean War and the Suez Crisis both occurred during the 1950s, and, on each occasion, the entire TAR was called up. Throughout the Cold War, however, the Territorial Army was never regarded as a particularly usable force overseas, either by the government of the day or by the regular army. This was due to the fact that the entire Territorial Army had to be mobilized by royal prerogative in a wartime scenario, as occurred in the World Wars, with no flexibility to use smaller formations as specialists if required, and, as a result, relied purely on territorials willing to volunteer the services. Therefore, its role was, at least unofficially, seen as home defense, and, as a result, the TAR was not used in conflicts such as the 1982 Falklands War and 1991 Gulf War Armored Division in the Middle East. Some 550 TAR personnel volunteered for and deployed on Op Resolute in December 1995, the UK's contribution to the NATO mission to enforce peace in the former Yugoslavia. The government subsequently passed the Reserve Forces Act 1996, which enables individual reservists to be compulsorily called up for deployment, with certain caveats exempting those in full-time education and other compassionate reasons, as well as providing protection by employment law for members' civilian jobs should they be mobilized, which has led to the Army Reserve increasingly providing routine support for the regular army overseas, including delivery of composite units to release regular units from standing liabilities, including Bosnia, Kosovo, Cyprus and the Falkland Islands. In 2003, 9,500 reservists, the vast majority of them from the reserve, were mobilized to take part in Operation TELIC, the invasion of Iraq. In contrast, only some 420 regular reservists were called up. Approximately 1,200 members of the Army Reserve deployed annually on tours of duty in Iraq, Operation Herrick in Afghanistan and elsewhere, normally on 6-month-long roulements. They cannot be used in operations for more than 12 months in any 3-year period, making most of those who have already served ineligible for call-up for 2 years afterwards. Although reservists may choose to to volunteer for additional deployments. Army reservists have a minimum commitment to serve 27 training days per annum, or 19 days for some national units. This period normally includes a 2-week period of continuous training either as an Army Reserve unit, on courses, or attached to a regular unit. Army Reserve soldiers are paid at a similar rate as the regular equivalents while engaged on military activities. Soldiers of the Army Reserve are often serving alongside the regular counterparts, including operations in Afghanistan where 1,000 out of the total 10,100 deployed have been reservists, around 10% of the total. The annual budget of the Army Reserve is approximately £350 million, around 1.3% of the total defence budget. 2011 onwards, and renaming under the Future Reserves 2020 plan outlined by then Secretary of State for Defence Liam Fox on 18 July 2011. The Ministry of Defence will provide more money to train more Army Reservists with the objective of more frequently deploying entire Army Reserve units. Under the reform plan, the total force will be restructured so that, by 2020, the British Army will have 120,000 soldiers, of which 84,000 will be regulars and 35,000 reservists. The Territorial Army was renamed under that plan, becoming the Army Reserve. Basic training. Soldiers for Army Reserve soldiers. Recruit training is structured into 2 phases. Phase 1, also known as the Common Military Syllabus, and Phase 2, Specialist Training. In Phase 1, recruits cover the Common Military Syllabus 1414. Phase 1A is a series of 4 training weekends at regional Army training units, or the recruit could attend a consolidated Phase 1A week-long course. Phase 1 training concludes with a 2-week Phase 1B training course normally held at the Army Training Centre, Pierbright of the Army Training Regiment, Winchester, or Grantham. Recruits to the 4th Battalion, the Parachute Regiment and the Honourable Artillery Company complete their equivalent of CMS within their own units. Phase 1 is followed by Phase 2, a further period of specialist training specific to the type of unit the recruit is joining. This is normally conducted by the armour service that the recruit is joining, for example 4 infantry units. Phase 2 consists of the 2-week Combat Infantryman's course held at the Infantry Training Centre, Catterick. Officers. To gain a commission, potential officers have to pass through 4 modules of training, which together form the Army Reserve Commissioning Course. Module A consists of basic field training and elementary military skills. This can be completed at either a UOTC over a number of weekends, or over 2 weeks at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. Module B covers training in tactics, leadership, doctrine and navigation, both in theory and in practice, with a focus on the section battle drills and the platoon combat estimate. This training can either be spread over 10 weekends at a UOTC, or 2 weeks at the RMAS. Module C builds on the tactics, leadership, doctrine and navigation taught in Module B, with a greater focus on the theory behind these constructs. CBRN training is also added at this point, and officer cadets undergo a number of field exercises to test their military and leadership skills. Module C can only be undertaken at the RMAS. Module D. Once the officer cadet has completed their Arm Officer Selection Board, they can complete this final module, after which they will become commissioned officers in the British Army. Based at the RMAS, this module consists primarily of a prolonged field exercise, followed by drill training in preparation for the passing out parade. On successful completion of Module D, the officer cadets receive the commission and become second lieutenants. Further training that is required prior to them being considered for operational deployment and promotion to lieutenant includes post-commissioning training, again run at an OTC, over 3 weekends. Special to arm training is specific to the type of unit the subaltern is joining, and covers a 2-week period. This is increasingly integrated with the tactics phase of a regular training course. For example, the platoon commander's battle course held at the Infantry Battle School in Brecon, which is integrated with regular training, or the Yeomanry Tactics course held at the Land Warfare Centre in Warminster, which is not. Bibliography. Beckett, Ian F. W. Territorials, A Century of Service. First published April 2008 by DRA Printing of 14 Mary C. Cole Road, The Millfields, Plymouth PL 13JY. On behalf of TAR 100, ISBN 97809557813-1-5. Hayman, M. A. Hayman, The Territorial Army 1999, an archive document of the TAR in 1999 before the implementation of the Strategic Defence Review. Messenger, Charles. A History of the British Infantry.